Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will read a story about a man who had an evil brother made his life hell and found out he got the man's wife pregnant and their son wasn't his. Now the brother's crawling back after their parents disowned him and left the man their $2 million inheritance. Let us begin, shall we? I have a younger brother, Caleb, who has despised me all my life. If you're wondering if it was because of jealousy, you're wrong. I wasn't the favored child. He was. My mom always pampered him. He was the golden child in the family. Mom would cook his meals, do his laundry, and even ask me to help him with his schoolwork. I was expected to help just because he was family, but the same courtesy was never extended to me. Growing up, I accepted it. I was more independent than he was, maybe to my detriment. I never expected him to help me, and he never did. Caleb wasn't the type of brother who lent a hand, and he only reached out when he wanted something from me. I was quiet and introverted, content with my studies and hobbies, while he was rough, loud, and boisterous, just like our dad. I'm straightforward, blunt, and don't sugarcoat things, and I think that gave my mom a negative impression of me. As a result, Caleb became the family favorite. It didn't bother me when we were younger, but things began to change when Caleb found ways to bully and mock me. He'd tease me about my height, make fun of the fact I wore glasses, and even sneak into my room to read my diary, which he would then use to get me in trouble. I'd tell my parents about the invasion of privacy, but they just laughed it off, telling me it wasn't a big deal. Caleb's antics escalated, including nearly breaking my glasses and even putting stones in my cereal, which I thankfully noticed before it could hurt my teeth. My mom brushed it off as how brothers bond. Whenever we fought, Caleb would target my insecurities, focusing on things that hurt. We went to the same school, and Caleb, instead of standing up for me against the bullies, joined in. He'd call me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and even encourage the bullies to physically hurt me, telling them I was a failure. One day during a fight, Caleb even told me to kill myself. That hit me hard, especially since I was struggling with my mental health. I'm doing better now, but back then those words cut deep. Dad was always working, and Mom never really intervened. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for annoying Caleb. As time passed, things got worse. In high school, Caleb tried to burn my hair, and Mom sided with him, insisting he was just playing. Thankfully, Dad stepped in, finally taking my side. He threatened to call the police, which shocked Caleb because he'd never faced any consequences for his actions. My dad told him it was time to stop and that he needed to start respecting me. That conversation with Dad was a turning point for me. Dad admitted that he'd waited for Caleb to mature, but he was starting to see Caleb for what he was, a bully. I was finally validated. I opened up to Dad about everything, including the bullying at school, and he was horrified. The next day, he spoke to the principal about the bullying and later enrolled me in MMA classes to help me defend myself. Learning MMA wasn't easy for me. I was a nerd, after all, but I threw myself into it. I balanced my studies with workouts and MA training, and it completely transformed me, both physically and mentally. One day, Caleb stole my pocket money, which I had saved by helping around the house. When I caught him about to leave with his friends, I confronted him. He mocked me, saying I could only run to Dad for help. That's when something snapped in me. I punched him square in the face, knocking him to the ground. He cried like a baby, and I took back my money from his pocket. Mom heard the commotion and rushed out, immediately taking Caleb's side. She scolded me for not setting a better example as the older brother. But Dad wasn't having it. He told Caleb he was lucky I only punched him and that anyone else would have called the cops. He told him stealing wasn't acceptable. Caleb threw a tantrum, but Dad stood firm. Caleb, humiliated and realizing I wasn't the same, stormed off to his room. From that moment on, Caleb kept his distance. He realized he couldn't bully me anymore. Though he would still try to taunt me when our parents weren't around, it was clear things had changed. I finally felt like an equal in the family, but it wasn't perfect. Caleb would still ignore me, walk away without speaking, or mutter insults under his breath when no one was looking. I tried to get Mom to intervene and mediate, but she always refused, claiming she didn't want to get involved. I even asked her why Caleb treated me the way he did, but she brushed me off. It felt like a dead end. Eventually, I left for university, having earned a scholarship for my academic achievements. Dad threw me a party, and Mom seemed proud, but Caleb barely acknowledged it. The day I left, I felt both excited for the future and relieved to escape the toxic environment at home. University life was a breath of fresh air. I made new friends, thrived in my studies, and finally felt free from Caleb's verbal attacks. I started dating Karen during my second year. We met at a party, and things clicked immediately. Coming from a religious family, we knew having kids without being married was a big deal, but we didn't expect to find out she was pregnant during our final year. We got married shortly after graduating, and our wedding was small but joyful. I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I've always believed in monogamy. I never cheated despite occasional attention from other women. I was content with Karen. But over the years, I found out she had been unfaithful twice, once with a married coworker and later with an ex from high school. I tried to forgive her. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home, and I thought we could work through it. Things seemed okay for a while, and I tried to rebuild trust. But 3 months ago, Karen dropped a bombshell. She admitted to another affair, one that was worse than the others, and suggested that our son might not even be mine. Hearing that felt like my entire world crumbled. The betrayal was unbearable. I demanded answers, but Karen was indifferent. She had no real explanation, just vague excuses. It wasn't until later that she confessed the truth. It was Caleb. I was shocked. I confronted Karen, asking how she could betray me like that. She explained that she and Caleb had become friends during the time I introduced her to my family. She was trying to fit in with my family, and Caleb started showing interest in her. Over time, they began an affair, which Karen claimed was a mistake she couldn't control. She confessed she wasn't sure if our son was mine or Caleb's, but had stayed with me because she knew I was dependable. The revelation broke me. I couldn't look at her the same way again. I calmly packed my bags and told Karen I was leaving. She begged for my forgiveness, claiming that if I truly loved her, I would fight for her. But I couldn't. The trust was gone. She had slept with my brother. That was unforgivable. I checked into a hotel and then went to my parents' house, telling them everything. Mom initially tried to defend Caleb, saying he would never do such a thing, but I called Caleb, confronting him about the affair. He denied it at first, but when I mentioned Karen's confession, he started blaming her, saying it wasn't his fault because women were attracted to him. I told him I would expose him, and when he mocked me, I did just that, putting him on speakerphone for our parents to hear. Mom's defense of Caleb faltered as she realized the truth. Dad was furious, telling Caleb how he had betrayed not only me, but the whole family. He made it clear that Caleb was no longer a part of the family, cutting him off from the college funds he had set up. Caleb's facade crumbled, and he was left exposed, his actions finally revealed. But there was another gut-wrenching part to all this, Karen's admission that our son might not even be mine. She explained that because of the affair, she had doubts about the paternity. The thought of my son not being mine, after everything I'd sacrificed for him, was something I couldn't stomach. I immediately took a paternity test, needing closure. The paternity test confirmed my worst fear. Caleb was the biological father. I can't begin to write how painful it was for me to digest this news. It was worse than when Karen told me that she had been cheating on me. I felt so pissed that my son didn't belong to me. However, I guess God works in mysterious ways, because I decided to stay strong throughout all this. Karen begged me that I should keep visiting my son since he should not be punished for all this, but I just could not bear to see him. He reminded me of Caleb, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally breathe again. I moved into my own bachelor pad, which was a strange yet exhilarating feeling. I had married young, And throughout my marriage, I never really got the chance to live on my own or experience what it was like to be independent. But now, living alone in a space that was completely mine, it felt almost surreal. It was the start of something new, a chance to redefine who I was. The transition was easy for me, though. I've always been a pretty independent person, even when I was married. I was quick to adapt to my bachelor lifestyle, and to be honest, I loved it. I loved the freedom, the solitude, and the space to reflect on everything that had happened. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life again. I could set my own schedule, make my own decisions, and just focus on my own happiness. And it felt amazing. A couple of weeks ago, my dad called me out of the blue, sounding more serious than I had heard him in a while. He told me he had been considering changing his will and he was calling me to let me know about it. Apparently, he didn't want to leave anything to Caleb. If there's one thing to know about my father, it's that he's extremely stubborn. Once he makes up his mind about something, that's it. There's no room for negotiation. It didn't surprise me that he was so firm in his decision to cut Caleb out of the will. Now, to understand the full extent of this, you need to know about my brother Caleb. He has always been the favored child in our family. It's a fact that has been painfully obvious to me for as long as I can remember. Caleb could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, and no matter what kind of mess he got himself into, they would always bail him out, that is, until now. Caleb's betrayal had finally broken my dad's trust in him, and my dad was done with him. I knew Caleb had tried to reach out to our parents since their fallout. He showed up at their house, begging for forgiveness, trying to make amends, but my dad refused to let him in. In fact, my mom, who had always been a soft touch when it came to Caleb, also seemed to be done with him. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was more like she had finally realized that there were consequences to Caleb's actions. And it must have been hurting her deeply, because as much as she loved Caleb, she was standing by my dad's decision. It seemed like this time there was no going back for her. Throughout all of this, not once did Caleb reach out to me. He never sent a message to apologize, to try and make things right between us. It was clear that Caleb didn't regret what he had done. He was just upset that he had been cut off from the family. And honestly, that was the part that stung the most for me. If he had even just acknowledged the hurt he had caused me, it might have been easier to move past, but he didn't. It was all about him. When Dad told me about his plans to leave everything to me in his will, I was shocked. Dad had worked hard of his whole life, building his assets, his retirement fund, and his life insurance. It all added up to nearly $2 million. And here he was, telling me he was leaving it all to me and leaving Caleb with just a single dollar. The idea of Caleb getting nothing was certainly fitting, but it still felt strange. It wasn't about the money for me. It was more about the finality of it all, the closure. The only stipulation in the will was that if Dad passed before Mom, she would continue living in their house, though the ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind that at all. I loved my mom, and I would take care of her for as long as she needed. She had always been there for me, and I wanted to be there for her in return. As fate would have it, Caleb somehow got wind of this. I'm not sure how, but somehow he found out about the changes to the will. And since he couldn't reach either of our parents, he called me yesterday. His voice sounded desperate, and I could tell he was trying to find a way to fix things, to repair the damage he had done. He told me that he had been struggling with college and that after Karen found out the truth about Henry's paternity, she had been demanding child support. He said he had no money, that he had been looking for part-time jobs but couldn't find anything, and then he begged me to talk to our parents, to help him get back into their good graces. He wanted us to start fresh, to forget everything that had happened, and for me to help him out. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh. I couldn't believe it. I told him I was done with him, that I couldn't help him. I told him that he should have thought about all of this before he slept with my wife and got her pregnant. Caleb, of course, tried to argue. He said I was being unfair, that I was blaming him when Karen was just as much to blame. I agreed with him, but I also reminded him that I had divorced Karen, and now she and Henry were his responsibility. This was the consequence of his actions. Caleb's voice started to rise, and he began to argue with me, but I cut him off. I told him he wasn't the favored child anymore. I told him he was the black sheep of the family, the one who slept with his own brother's wife and destroyed everything. At that point, Caleb broke down. He started crying, telling me how everyone had turned on him, how even our grandparents and relatives were attacking him. He was right, in a way, but it wasn't my problem anymore. I told him we were done, that he should never call me again, that I was no longer his brother. Since that conversation, I've been replaying it over and over in my head. It's strange. I've never heard Caleb cry like that. Not since we were kids. Part of me felt something. I won't lie. It did hurt me to hear him so vulnerable, so helpless. But then I reminded myself of everything he had done. He had destroyed my marriage, he had ruined my life, and he hadn't once taken responsibility for it. I'm left wondering now if I should talk to my parents again about Caleb, or if that would make me an asshole. Some of you might be thinking I'm being cruel for not reaching out to Henry after all the truth came out. I know it might seem heartless, but I just can't do it. I don't feel comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a typical stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, and now I've discovered he's really Caleb's. I've been hurt by it, and I've cried over it for days. But I can't have anything to do with Henry, because if I do, Karen will find a way to worm her way back into my life. And I can't let that happen. I need space. I need to heal. So, at least for now, I don't want to see him. It's later found out that it was my mom who told Caleb about the will change, and he called me as a last-ditch attempt to mend things. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She admitted that she thought Caleb had learned his lesson and that I had punished him enough. My dad wasn't having it. He told her that if she truly believed Caleb deserved forgiveness, then they couldn't stay married. He couldn't forgive him for what he had done. My dad's ultimatum shut her up, and he made it clear to her that if she spoke to Caleb again, she would be out of the house. As expected, my dad's stubbornness prevailed. Hopefully my mom will learn from this. It's been 5 months ever since. My relationship with my parents has improved significantly. My dad and I now go golfing every weekend, and we've started bonding in a way we hadn't before. He treats me more like a buddy than a son, and I've come to appreciate that. My mom, though she misses Caleb, has respected my dad's wishes and stayed away from him. The last I heard about Caleb was from my cousin, who told me that Caleb had been asking everyone for money. Eventually, he dropped out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are now living together, raising Henry, and Caleb has a job as a part-time mechanic. I don't bring Caleb up in conversations with my parents, and neither do they. It's just easier that way. As for me, things are going well. I got promoted at work a couple of months ago, and my salary has improved significantly. I haven't started dating anyone yet. I'm still focused on healing. I've been going to therapy, and I'm hopeful that with time I'll be able to move on from all of this. But for now, I'm doing okay, and I'm taking things one day at a time. And that's the end of this story. Leave your comments in the comment sections to tell us how you feel about this story, and I will see you in the next video.